This is Polish route number 50. It's from Małkinia to Sokołów. As you can see, the road is brand new. There was a road here before, but it was nowhere near as good as this one. Indeed, as we go up there, about 8 kilometers or so, there is, no, I've exaggerated, 6. 6 or 7. There's the bridge over the River Bug. Cost 120 million zloty to build, but it looks, I think, really outstanding. That's about what? So about 27 million euros, approximately. Anyway, so there was a railway line here. Now, the railway line dates the 19th century, and it linked Małkinia with Sokołów, the same as the road does now. Down here, we had a siding. Well, a branch line, really, rather more than a siding. And this branch line was built in the interwar period. The point of this was to allow access to a gravel pit, which is down here, a quarry if you like, and the gravel pit itself is really large, and this belonged to a Lublin-based company which mined granite and gravel. The company had some problems finding labour during the occupation. It was taken over by the National Socialist administration, and initially farmers who didn't give enough food to the National Socialists, who didn't fulfil their contingents, who didn't appear before the local administration when they were called, people like that ended up here. Now that camp, later to be called Treblinka 1, had usually around 2,000 people in at any one time, 1,500 to 2,000, something like that, largely working on the quarry, but they also worked at the railway yards at Małkinia, and some of them were used for the Bug River to straighten it up and to improve the flood defences of it. In the spring of 1942, Germans started turning up here with building materials, and they, using the labour from the camp at Treblinka 1, they then started the construction of Treblinka 2, which is the death camp. And here I'm taking you on a walk into the death camp as would have approximately been seen by people coming in. Now, I need to point out that there are more trees here today than they were then. It's normally the other way around. The forests are receding, but not in this area. There are more forests, and we see that from photographs. We can actually stand in the same place and compare them. And I might even put up some videos showing the difference between then and now. So the first site that people got was however a forest. Now, in the summer of 1942, there was an urgency amongst the Nazi leadership responsible for killing the Jews, Operation Reinhardt, people based in Lublin, and the person in charge was one Odilo Globocnik. What he wanted to do is just quite clear. He wanted to kill the Jews as quickly as possible, irrespective of the economic damage that this would do. Now, on the subject of that, it's not only the case that many Jews were working in workshops producing things for the German war economy, and it could be people producing, for example, leather goods, saddles and things like this. It could be wheelwrights, it could be all sorts of people within that area producing directly for the army, but it's also those producing indirectly. And in my opinion, it's this above all which shows the total failure of Nazi economics. If all the people who repair the agricultural machinery are suddenly murdered, how are the farmers supposed to produce food? The farmers were almost entirely Catholic, but the tradespeople, the small business people, the artisans, to a large extent were Jewish. And in those days, jobs were handed down. So they are to a certain extent these days, but not as they are. If your great-grandfather had been a blacksmith, it's almost certain that you would be one too. So that's how it worked. And there was also the place where the business was provided from, which may have been in the same family for a couple of hundred years, for example. Now, so what the Nazis did in getting rid of these people, they created an economic hole which couldn't be filled. But for Globocnik, that didn't matter. What mattered was killing the people. And even, I would argue, towards the end of the war, killing the Jews had more importance for the Nazis than winning the war. And we can see that by the resources that was put into murdering Jews, which could have been put into the war effort, defeating the Soviets, for example. So, the people, there was lots of roundups, people put on trains in the summer of 42, and they were brought initially to the railway station at Treblinka, which is some 4 kilometers or so from here. There, the trains waited. There were so many of them, they had to wait there. 20 wagons were decoupled, or rather the 20th wagon was decoupled, and then it was pushed. The train of 20 wagons was pushed into here. I don't understand why it was pushed in. There may be, to me it seems more logical to pull it in, but there may be a very good reason from people who know about trains to be able to explain that. The people were then were forced to get out the train. At the beginning, Nazis selected around 100 people to do the work that was needed in burying the dead, and then they killed them in the evening, and then the next day they repeated the same thing. But so they take the first lot of 20 carriages, and the second lot, the third lot, and the fourth lot. Meanwhile, other carriages were there, other trains I should say, were coming. There were so many of them. Now, the camp commandant was Irmfried Eberle from Austria, whose previous experience included killing the mentally and physically challenged in the T4 program, but also, I believe, in February of 1942, as part of the Organisation Tod on the Eastern Front, he was killing wounded German soldiers. Then, once he'd killed enough wounded German soldiers, he came here. But he was clearly not very good at his job. He didn't know how to manage the number of people coming in. If you've seen Claude Lanzmann's film, Shoah, he drives up the path which we've just taken, and he gets to these sleepers, let's call them, and then he stops, and then he gets out and he walks. This is part of the monument. I think these were put in 1964, representing the sleepers of the railway line which took people into the camp. Notice, of course, they are much bigger than normal sleepers. Now, as we come up here, so in this report done by Richard Glazer, who survived, he was one of those that actually escaped from Treblinka in the revolt in August 1943. He said when he came up here, he thought he could even heard what he thought was attractive. It may well have been the gas chamber, and he was delighted to be coming to what he thought was an agricultural colony rather than the Theresienstadt, where he'd been up until then, which hadn't been to his liking. Of course, this was much worse. Now, the stones we see here, part of the monument, and this marks the approximate board of their camp. Very approximate, because since 64, when they were more interested in maybe just remembering things, but since then work has been done, archaeological work, which has found the real boundaries of the camp. Initially, this forest wasn't here then, so this is all new, if you like. It was a bit since the Second World War. On this part here, which we have now, this was where the SS had their barracks. Commandant's barrack was here. We had even the prisoners, the work prisoners, were down there, and so this was called the living camp, so to speak. And anyway, we're going now into where the death camp was. So the train would come in. Now it was, according to the engine driver in Shoah, it was he actually went inside the camp. So this could be the reason why he pushed the train and not pulled it, because that way he didn't get very far inside. Now, one thing I found out recently is that the wagons, which I believed were all the same size, it turns out they weren't, and there were different sizes of wagons. I suppose it makes sense. I mean, today you've got different sizes of container. You've got 20 foot, you've got a Super 20, you've got a 40, and probably others as well. And so the wagons weren't the same. Now, the people were really pushed inside, as they would be today, for example, in a underground metro system. And you can think of what it's like in London at rush hour, well, what it was like before COVID, then that was what it was like on these trains for many people. Other people had more room, but it depends. One against Samuel Willenberg, he talks of sitting on the floor in the carriage when he was taken from Opatów to Treblinka. Now, what you see here, none of this is original. I mean, some things which have turned up are, for example, we have over there some I think called Czech hedgehogs, these anti-tank things. They were found recently. So the people would be forced out of the train. Obviously they'd be only too pleased to get out the train. Now, there was a gate down there and there was another gate possibly in this area here, and that led the people into an area where they had to take off their clothes. There was a barracks for the women to undress, and for the men to undress. Although at the beginning it was done outside, and then people were taken via a slough, a funnel, turning into where the gas chambers were. Now, the route that hasn't been marked out here, but what we can do is we can sort of walk up. Now, it would appear that, again, when they built this monument, they didn't put the central piece, which is, I think, meant to be the gas chamber, in the position where it originally was. Not only that, though, the first gas chambers were built in the early summer of 42, and then late summer, what was called new gas chambers were built with a capacity of 2,000 people in one go. And the way they're killing people using the exhaust fumes would be dreadfully slow death. Now at Helmno we know they put some poison into the engines, which would then possibly kill the people faster. What that poison was, as of today, I don't know. But when the archaeological digs were done in 2007, when these things were found, not only that, the report from the garage where the lorry was fixed actually said that there was something wrong with the lorry itself, because the fuel consumption was twice what it should be. The exact nature of what it was that killed people is still not known. Was it a tank engine or whatever? So from arriving at, say, Treblinka station, where they waited, until the moment when they came out the gas chamber dead, that could take around 3.5 hours at the beginning. But later, once they got a bit more organised, then they found out how to do it, and to do it quicker. So here we have this enormous graveyard representing the places where the Jewish communities were destroyed, although admittedly still Jewish community in Warsaw, for example, but most of these are Städtele, destroyed completely. Some places, such as the Pruszków, about 8% of the population was Jewish. There's other places here where the overwhelming bulk of the people were Jewish. Not every stone has a name on it. Some of them don't. Most of them don't, which I take to represent those communities which remain unnamed. In some cases, nearly everybody was murdered here, such as here Sokołów Podlaski. There we have Przemysl. Most of the people from Przemysl were deported to Bełżec and murdered there. So I've done a number of videos from here, from Treblinka. I've done videos on the those responsible for it, such as Ianfred Eberle, and I'm currently doing one on Höfler as well. Tomala, haven't finished that video either, but I've started it. Reinhardt Tomala, the architect. So if you're interested in this sort of thing, then you might want to subscribe. But sorry for the wind, but for the moment, from me here in Treblinka, northeastern Poland, thanks for listening, and all the best. Bye for now.